So in Ollie's recent video on GCN, he spoke about this.
And Jodie is great at doing this.
So I thought to myself, it would be a good idea to take a little bit of a deeper dive into this process and a deeper dive into the progression principle. So in order to adapt, you need to progressively overload the muscular system and you need to progressively overload the cardiovascular system. But the way in which you progressively overload these two systems all comes down to how you're performing in the individual training sessions. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about how to apply progression within the interval sessions themselves. So the best way to describe this is to take you through a series of interval sessions and just show you how the progression principle can be performed. So let's take this session for example. So in this session, the cyclist has a fixed warm-up they do every single time, and then we're doing some prime intervals. So basically, the first part of the interval, as you can see, is at a higher intensity power. So it's around about 120% of their threshold. And then, straight after the interval, they're going into a sustained power block of 9 minutes. They go into 2 minutes recovery, and they repeat 5 of these sequences in total. And the first one, I always, with my cyclist, I like to kind of set the sessions where we're not going through it straight away. I'd rather it be a little bit too easy than them fail the session with it being too hard. So let's say, for example, within the sequence, you do your warm-up, and then you do 1 minute, 120% of FTP, and then you go into 9 minutes at 85 to 90% of FTP or threshold or critical power, whatever it is you use. The athlete does the session, and then they leave their feedback. And after they leave their feedback, I analyse that feedback, I analyse their session, and then I leave my feedback. Then based on the response, we then decide how we approach the next training session within this sequence. And the progression principle could look something like this. 1 minute into 9 minutes. 1.5 minutes into 8.5 minutes. 2 minutes into 8 minutes. 2.5 minutes into 7.5 minutes. 3 minutes into 7 minutes. So as you can see, we are progressively building up and lengthening the higher intensity section. Because what we want to do is we want to take the cyclist from this place to this place, and over that period, they transform. This is what we want to be doing. We want to be taking the cyclist and giving them the ability to be able to do a session they wasn't able to do previously. So let's say, for example, within this sequence, you take the cyclist to something like 5 minutes, 120% into 5 minutes at 90%. And that's what you build them towards. And they complete the session. If you started with that sequence, so they came to you and you just gave him the 5x5 straight away, it would be too intense. They wouldn't be able to clear lactate, they'll lower the pH of the muscle, and they would have to slow down their muscular system, and their cardiovascular system would not be able to cope with the demands of that intensity and the stimulus which is being placed in the body. So you're finding that balancing act, you're finding a set of intensities which nags the rider, and then through the analysis process, you're understanding what do we need to do to apply progression. Because sometimes the 1 minute and 9 minute might be too hard, and you have to go to 30 seconds and 9.5 minutes. Or sometimes the 1 minute and the 9 minute might be perfect, but there's adaptation still to come, which means I might repeat the session again. So I might repeat the session a few times. Now, when I talk about repeating sessions and I talk about sequences, it's not a case of like they do a session and the next session they progress and the next session they progress. Basically, the training week will look a little bit something like this. So in this example, the cyclist is resting on a Monday, they're resting on a Thursday. On the Tuesday, they're doing an endurance-based session, which is kind of prepping the body for the Wednesday's key session. And then the Wednesday's key session will have this session locked in. And then rest Thursday. On the Friday, they'll be doing, let's say, a 90-minute endurance ride. Then on the Saturday, they'll be doing a different key session. And then on the Sunday, they'll be doing an endurance ride. And then as we progress to the next week, the key session on the Wednesday and the key session on the Saturday, these are the sessions in which we're applying the progression principle. And we're progressing the cyclist forward each week, as you can see here in the images. The cyclist is continually adapting, and we're progressing, and we're stepping forward, and we're taking them to a place. Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to produce as much power as possible, for as long as possible, as efficiently as possible. This is the goal. You want to take a cycling intensity, which is currently needs a large contribution from the anaerobic system, and you want to make it predominantly aerobic. This is what you want to be doing. And the only way you can do this is through progression and being progressive. A lot of people try to get to this place through intensity, and they misuse intensity a little bit. You need to build the cyclist forward. You need to build the cyclist up the correct way via using progression until you get to a point where they've adapted from the training. And when they've adapted from the training, this is when you start to incorporate the intensity. But the progression principle is everything. You give the cyclist the session, you analyse how they've responded to the session, and based from their individual response, what am I doing as the coach, or what are you doing as the self-coach to apply progression so they can adapt, they can bridge a gap, they can grow, and they can transform as a cyclist. The progression principle is everything. Now, there's many forms of progression. You can apply progression with training frequency, you can apply progression with training volume, but then also you can apply progression with the training intensity in terms of how you progress within the individual training sessions. So, just to recap, the athlete starts with 1 minute into 9 minutes, then 1.5 minutes into 8.5. And as you go down, you can see how they've progressed through the sequence and through the process. And you take them to a point where if they were to start at the end point now, they might be able to do it, but there'll be no aerobic control. It'll be chaotic. It'll be too intense. So we're going to get them to a point where they can perform sessions they currently wasn't able to perform because their body, their physiology, their fitness, the balance between the aerobic and anaerobic systems has shifted, and they're able to manage higher powers for longer durations because you've taught the body to be able to perform in this way. If you've got any questions, comment down below. I'll get them answered.